Before you start learning all sorts of complicated math, you first need to learn how to take a sentence in words and turn it into an equation that you can actually do math with. So we'll start with this example, which is 3 times the sum of 6 and a number. Now, we can point out some of the basic math operations, which are addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division, right? So immediately I'm seeing the word times here, which is going to mean multiplication, and I'm seeing sum, which is plus. Now, one thing that should stick out to you is the sum of. Whenever you see things like the sum of, or the difference of, or the product of, it's talking about one thing, right? So whenever you see the something of, that usually means parentheses. So we'll do that part first. So 6 plus, and now a number. Whenever it doesn't tell you what the number is in algebra, that means it's going to be a letter, a variable. You can use whatever letter you want. Most of the time in algebra, when we don't know a number, we use the letter x, but we can also use the letter n, because n for number, but you can literally use any letter. We'll just use the letter n for this. And then we have the last part, which is 3 times, and that will be 3 times everything else. So we'll do 3 times. Now this could just be the answer, but another way to write this in algebra is just without the multiplication sign. The reason for this being is in algebra, if you have two things next to each other without any sign in between, it just means multiplication, and it just kind of makes everything look nice and cleaner. So we're gonna go ahead and not put a sign here, and that will be our answer for this problem. All right, now here's another example for you. The quotient of 4 less than a number and 7. Now, the word quotient means division. And the important thing to remember is whenever you see the quotient of, or the sum of, or the difference of, you're usually going to have the word and in there somewhere, because there are 2 parts to it. And our 2 parts are 4 less than a number and 7. Those are our 2 parts. Now, we could use this division sign, but in algebra we usually just write it as a fraction. So we're going to have our fraction symbol, and the top of it is going to be the first part, which is 4 less than a number. Now, less than, you probably know, is subtraction. But this gets a little tricky, because you might be tempted to just say, okay, well, 4 less than a number, well, that's 4 minus n. But that's actually not the case. For example, let's say that your friend has $20, and you want to say that you have 4 less dollars than him. Find out how much money you have. You wouldn't say, all right, well, let's do 4 minus 20. You actually flip it around. You would say 20 minus 4, which is 16. And you would say, I have $16. So the word less than, you could call it a turnaround word or whatever. Basically, it just means that whenever you have less than, you need to flip the 2 numbers around. And you can just, this isn't something you have to memorize. You can just think of it logically in how you speak in real life, just like this situation here. So in this case, we're not going to put 4 minus n. We're actually going to put n minus 4. It's 4 less than n. And the bottom is easy. It's just the other part, the other side of the and, which is just 7. And there you go. Our answer in this case is n minus 4 over 7. Here's another problem. The product of the cube of a number and 3. Now what I'd like you to do, if you want to, is go ahead and pause the video and try this problem out for yourself, and then unpause and see how you did. Alright, so the product of the cube of a number and 3. Well, immediately I'm seeing the product of, which is a very common phrasing, the something of, right? So that immediately tells me that there's going to be an and, which there is, and there's going to be 2 parts to it. The cube of a number and 3. Those are our 2 parts. And the product means multiplication. So we are multiplying these 2 parts together. So the first part is the cube of a number. Well, we have a number, right? And then the cube of a number means to the 3rd power, because squared means to the 2nd power, cube means to the 3rd power. So whenever you see the cube of a number, that means to the 3rd power. So we write that with a little 3 here. And now we have the second part, and 3. It's just 3, right? So we can do times 3. Now, this can be our final answer. That is totally valid and fine. There are other ways we can write it. If you ever see problems with a dot, that's also a multiplication sign, and usually we use that in algebra instead of the x for the multiplication sign because the letter x is used so much anyway, and it can get things kind of confusing. So that's why we usually use a dot. Also, as I said before, if you just use no sign, like this, that's also acceptable because that means multiplication without a sign there. We usually put the number in front before the letter, but any of these answers are acceptable. Don't think that you have to do it a specific way unless your teacher says you have to for some reason. So now what if you have to do it the other way? What if you have to take an equation like this and turn it into a sentence? So let's look at this example, 5x equals 40. Well, if you couldn't tell just by me reading the question to you, I kind of just said the answer. 5 times x equals 40. That's it. This can be your answer. That's fine. That's totally acceptable. Of course, there are other ways you can write it. A lot of the times, if you look in your textbook, instead of the word equals, they'll put the word is. So in this case, we could say 5 times x is 40. That's the same thing as equals. Or if you want to sound really fancy and impress your teacher, you could put the product of 5 and we can even say like a number is 40. And now all of a sudden, you sound really fancy and you're so good at math. But yeah, all of these are acceptable. All right, here's another example of this, and what I'd like you to do is pause the video and try this one out for yourself. All right, so we have x plus 17 equals 34. Again, I basically just read the answer to you. X plus 17 equals 34. And that's it. That can be your answer. Or if you'd like the fancy, super smart sounding way of doing it, you can put our favorite phrase, the sum of x and 17 is 34. Two ways to write it. They're both fine. And with that, you have begun your Algebra 2 journey. And if you'd like to actually start solving these math equations, then you can watch this video right here. Thanks for watching.